Oh, why won't you let me go sideways?
I joined and I just recently filled out the application.
Are you streaming the?
Yes, I am attempting
That's
to.
great. I've done articles, but not for this meeting. Not for this meeting.
No.
So I always somewhere in my town. And I was telling her I just made a blog.
Amazing meeting. Um, I think I've met most of you. My name's Shay, and I am your current president. Most of you should have gotten an email with our current candidates, and so I encourage you to vote. It's going to be closing, I believe, OMS what you want to see. I always start by reading our mission. This is very important to me. So the Oregon Mycological Society is an educational and scientific organization. Its mission is to study, collect, and identify fungi, to educate members and the public in fungi identification, and to promote health and safety in the gathering and consumption of fungi. The society is organized as a 501(c) nonprofit corporation, and we are entirely volunteer ran. So I am going to get a little bit into a slideshow here, talking about volunteer opportunities. We really need you. The fall show is our biggest educational event. Most of you who have attended or have participated and volunteered, you know how huge of an effort it is. It really is our way of giving back to the community. It's our largest surge of new members. And it really invigorates and excites people, and that is, that's our MO. So let me bring my computer over here. Okay, and Kathy McBride was kind enough to put this presentation together. So I'm not taking credit for it. She just couldn't be here, so I'm surprised. Oh, well, that's not good. I'll just talk really loud and project.
You can move the mic.
It's stuck, they take it down, so I can't. So before I do, everyone, if you have to pay for parking, they are ticketing tonight. So there are no getting away with it. Unfortunately, if you have to pay for parking, you should probably go handle that because we don't want you getting a ticket. And yeah, I agree, parking should be free, but yeah, it's only $2. Okay, so fall show coming up October 27th. And I already touched base, it's our biggest educational event of the year. It's open to the public, it displays mushrooms. OMS members have gathered. Guest speakers, food, and vendors are also part of the show. This year, we have 19 vendors. Prior to this, we've had 12. So Freya has organized and worked with Ken Jamming, and we have a really cool variety of a bunch of stuff. So bring money to spend. And it's all ran by volunteers. So no matter what your skill level, you can help and contribute to the OMS Fall Show. So far, over 90 people have volunteered. Thank all of you. Okay, so the schedule, October 26th, specimen collection and table setup, individual or guided foraging, collect intact mushrooms, including stipe and vulva, some substrate and moss, which will be displayed at the show. The more variety, the better. Begin setup at Miller Hall. There is a cutoff time, which I know it's one of the emails, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. 9 a.m. Yeah. 9 a.m. Okay. Sunday. 9 a.m. Sunday is the deadline. So if you are showing up at 9:30 with some specimens, don't, because we really do have to have a firm 9 o'clock cutoff for those specimens. October 27th, show day. So open to the public, World Forestry Center, Miller Hall, right next door. It opens at noon. It ends at 5. There is a period of cleanup that we definitely need help with. We do our mushroom display tables, education group, scholarships, and vendors. The volunteers that are needed on October 26th are specimen collectors. There's no limit to the number of collectors. We need everyone to pitch in to have a full display. And we're getting some rain this week, so yay. Drop your specimens at the backside of in Miller Hall on Saturday evening up to 9 o'clock on Sunday. After hours drop out, just leave them outside. All specimens, and it does say 8 a.m., but it's not. There is no need to ID the specimens you deliver. We have a whole team of people that are going to be working the ID, so just bring them and we'll handle that. Please bring substrate, moss, or interesting pieces of wood. If you've got some skulls, if you've got some bones, I had some lying around, we added them in, and it made things look so cool. So any forest finds, bring them. Guided field trips are being set up, so look for emails soon. I think there's already been an email going out, but again, if you want to go with a group, maybe you feel more comfortable with some other people that have more experience, then just keep your eyes out for that. Initial setup of the show is from 1 to 4 p.m. It's a 3-hour shift. It is so much fun to be a part of. Watch the magic happen. Volunteers needed. So on October 27th, we need volunteers for show setup. That's from 8 to 11:30 a.m. I'm not going to read everything. I trust you guys. Number 2, work the show volunteers. This is workers at tables during the show, interacting with the public. That's a 3-hour shift. The early one, 11:30 to 2:30. The late one, 2:30 to 5:30. It can be a lot to interact with the public, so know yourself. 3 hours isn't too long, but it's a very big event. Then there's show teardown, 5 o'clock until finish. We have a 7 p.m. strict deadline, or else they start charging. Okay, pressing volunteer needs. So these are the ones that we're really hoping to get some people on. Mushrooms, the mushroom display table support, which is on the next slide. Foragers, Miller Hall set up on the 26th. Working the show, we need floaters, preservation table, afternoon shift, advanced ID table, both shifts, 2 people per shift. So we're looking for 4 advanced IDers. So if you have that skill, that's one that is in short supply, so please help us. Guest chef support, 1 person for each shift. You have to have your food handler's permit. So we're looking for 2 people with a food handler's permit to step up. And then tear down, October 27th, material team from Miller Hall Storage, half truck or a van, 2 to 3 people. You're going to be on me and Kim Brown's team, so super fun group. We're basically just going to schlep some stuff. So, bring some upper body strength. Let's see. My computer's a touch screen, and I think I forgot how to use. Okay, mushroom display table needs. Let's see. Okay, so we need people on the Guild White Sport from. Okay, so anyway, like we want to talk, right? Okay, so open, lead is filled, but assistance open. If you've got skills with ID, step up. I think that's what we're doing. And then, I think that might be my last slide. Oh, nope. All right. Reminders, remember, get your tickets in advance of the show. They are now available, and it is on our website. I know we were a little delayed in getting that on there, but Justina handled it, got that ticket available on the website. So if you are a member, please sign up and get yours. Also, remember, it's the zoo, it's a Sunday, parking is limited. We have great public transit coming to and from here, so utilize that MAX train. Save yourself the headache of driving in circles and then parking 2 miles away. All volunteers for Saturday or Sunday work checking in the volunteer room. These are free and very cool t-shirts on the day of the show. We want to track everyone who shows up to work. So if you volunteer, you get a shirt. This is a win. Be sure to come on October 27th. All right, that was the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and pass it along now to Roger Finger. And then after Roger comes and speaks, then Brent with our fall camp that's happening this next weekend is going to come up and just speak a moment about that. And then Kim Brown is going to introduce our highly esteemed speaker, which I have to say, I have never heard anybody say anything negative about Dr. Michael Beug, and almost every person that has had an interaction with him
it's just people. Good. Yes, I'm Roger Finger, and among other things, I lead field trips. Many of you know me already because you've been out on one of my field trips. But we've got a new game that we play, especially with the beginner trips. It's called Find the Golf Ball. How does that work? Well, we start out on our fork. We start walking around. We go about a mile. We turn around and make a circle. How do we know where we are? We use an app called Gaia. And almost all of the field trip leaders are using this application. We hope you do too, because it's an offline GPS application. Offline is important because we're out in the woods, right? So we've got to be able to tell where we've been and where we're going and get there safely. So that's how come my folks tend to come back in. Let's talk about that, but before we do it, I'm going to ask you to do something that nobody should ever do. I'm going to ask those of you, how many have Gaia installed already? That's a few, isn't it? I'm going to ask you folks to take out your cell phone and follow along. All right, you still don't unmute it or anything. We just want to learn how Gaia works and get through some of the new gotchas that are there in this version. Can you use the microphone, please? Sure. Okay, so.
Mind if I mic you for the YouTube channel since this is longer than I thought? That's for YouTube.
Okay, thanks. So Outside Magazine has purchased Gaia, and in doing so, they've expanded some of the offerings on it. They've changed the interface a little bit, and they've put up a sign-on screen the first time that you use it. They want you to register with Outside Magazine. Now, there's still no charge. You can buy the enhanced version, but there's no charge to register. However, there are some consequences which we'll talk about later in this discussion. So if you see this screen, it means you need to register and log in once, and after that, this annoying screen will go away. Before you go out on your first trip, you're going to want to download Gaia from Google Play or the Apple Store. You're going to want to test it out. Create your login, log in the first time, adjust the security settings, which we'll talk about. If you're buying the full version, it's about $60 a year. You don't have to, but it gives you the ability to download additional apps or maps, and it's good when you're in areas that don't have internet service. Then record a trip, try it out, pin some locations, and save it. If you can do this successfully, you're ready to take Gaia out into the woods. So with the free version, you do get some topo maps, and in fact, it does cover most of the areas that we go. However, there are some overlays that are pretty interesting. For example, they can overlay weather and land ownership, private versus public. They can tell you current or recent fires. That would be useful in the springtime when we're hunting morels. They can show you the backcountry trails, and they can recommend hikes for you. So you do get value for your $60. The quick start guide. Okay, so if you have your Gaia open right now, you should be clicking on the maps icon on the bottom, and then notice there are 4 buttons there. The first one is full screen. You'll have to click again to get out of full screen. 3D projection does nothing for you unless you're paying for the app. Show current location, that's the first button you're probably going to press. Otherwise, it'll keep you where you were last, and that does you no good at all. And then you can add or remove layers, and those are some of those topo features, road features, weather features that we talked about. Start your hike. Go to the trip button on the bottom, and then record. Once you press record, a timer will start up showing you how long you've been out on the trail, but all you're going to see is your current elevation, perhaps some speed if you've done this and you've been out already for a while, but you're going to have to go back to map in order to see exactly where you are and start reviewing the trace that it's going to create for you. When we finish, we're going to go back to this trip screen, press that timer now, the one that was in the record button spot, and that's going to either stop the recording or allow you to pause it. Maybe you're relocating to a different place. Well, the GAIA is going to create some very interesting information for you. You see on the top left, there's the map that it'll create, and all of those little pins there are places that I've been, that I found something. So it will give us some idea. I found Matsutake here, I found chanterelles there. I found an interesting geological feature somewhere else. You can notate these, and then you can add your own pictures to it. It actually takes you straight to a camera application built into the app. But I think one of the more interesting things is the elevation display. It shows you how much you've climbed up and down. It shows your instantaneous speed while you were doing that. It tells you how far you've come, on and on and on. It's very useful information. So we're done with our hike. We've clicked that button that stops recording. We're going to review the recordings we have. You've got recordings, folks? Yep, some folks have recordings. So if you click on one of those, now you notice I didn't really name these, but I could have and should have named them based on where I was, when I was, and what I found perhaps. It shows me the profile, my speed, the elevation, max, the minimum elevation, the pace, etc., and so on, plus all those pictures and details that I've captured. Now, here's the real gotcha. The first gotcha, remember from Outside Magazine, was that login screen, which once we satisfy that, we're past it and it's history. But the default that Outside Magazine put there is that your profile and your recordings are public. Now, we're mushroom hunters. We don't do that. I mean, if I want to share with you, I can share with you. It is a social media application. But in our use of it, this is a bad thing. So before you ever get out there and start making recordings, or if you have GAIA in your hand right now and you haven't done this yet, make sure you go to private profile instead of public. Okay, so that's what we just said. And I think that's all I've got. So just one more comment or topic. The beginners class. Now, there's always been a backlog of people that want to take the beginners class. So we are now attempting to do something about that. We've added one extra class this fall. Registration is now open. If you haven't taken it yet, please do. We'd love to have you. And we've added a field trip to the beginners class, so you can actually guarantee yourself of getting out there if you take this class. If you don't get into this one, that means we haven't satisfied the demand. That means we're going to hold more. There's one already scheduled for the spring, and based on demand, there may be one in the winter as well. So that's all I've got for today. Let's bring up, Kim, is it, Brent's going to come up and tell us about the fall MICO camp. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brent Cartier. I run our 2 camps that we do every year. This upcoming weekend is our fall camp. Is anybody here attending the fall camp? We got a few of us here. It's good to see you all. I'll see you next weekend. Just a heads up, I was out in the area. I brought a few things that I saw in the back, but there's a lot of things going on. I left a good number of lobsters and chanterelles that I saw. So they're out there, some goalies too. But I did want to let you all know that there are a few spots that have opened up and are available for camp. So if you are interested in joining, the sales are closed on Eventbrite right now. But if you are interested in joining, you can approach me at the end of the meeting tonight. I'll take your information and then we can arrange getting you registered for the camp if you're interested. So anybody here tonight, if you'd like to come and you haven't had a chance to join, it's this upcoming weekend at Camp Magruder at Rockaway Beach, where we have a guest speaker, Nicholas Raytar. He's going to be giving talks on various spooky fungi for the Halloween season. So things like bleeding tooth and jack-o'-lanterns. But also he's going to be giving a really deep talk on Xylaria species and the Yasuni National Forest down in Ecuador. So it's actually a really beautiful talk with a lot of biodiversity in the area and a lot of really great things to see, a lot of good information out of that. So if you're interested in joining, we're also doing a cooking demonstration, a dyeing demonstration as well. We go out and go mushroom picking the next day. Food is provided by the camp for you. It's just a really great kind of summer camp vibe. It's going to be a little bit rainy, but we're all mushroom hunters. That's what we're here for, right? So if you're interested at the end of camp, I'll be hanging out around the back. Come by and see me. Thanks.
I have a quick item about the election that I need to do, so this should take just about 2 minutes. We're required to hold elections for the officers and directors for the upcoming year. And to do this, we need to get nominations. We've already sent out 2 emails requesting nominations, and we got a good response. But the bylaws require also that we ask for nominations from the floor at this meeting. It's your last opportunity to nominate either yourself or someone you know. Understand that if you're nominating another person, they have to already agree to it. At this time, we will be looking for any additional nominations for president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary to serve a 1-year term, or for 2 directors who serve a 2-year term. So at this point, are there any additional nominations from the floor? Okay, nominations are closed out. I actually want to nominate someone. You want to nominate someone? I do. Linda? Are you agreeing to this? President Roger Picker, Vice President Tim Brown, Treasurer Ethan Disbrow, Secretary Erica Jensen, Directors we have 3 people plus a 4th now, Rachel Ziert, Grace Peck, and Rye Strike. You will receive emails in the next few weeks with more information about the candidates, and you'll also have a chance to hear from them at the November meeting. We don't have an exact time frame for when these emails will go out, but we do know that the election itself will be online via election buddy in November. So you will get all the details you need to let you know. Hey everyone, wow, we have a full house tonight, and I think we have extra chairs, so this is probably our most attended meeting, and it doesn't surprise me. And I also want to say thank you to a lot of long-time members coming back in here, so we are so happy to see you back. Definitely, you're much appreciated, and thank you for coming tonight. On that vein, I better go up there. Talk a lot about volunteers and OMS and all volunteers. So we're always looking for more. If you're interested in something, we can't list what's open, but if you have an idea.
Why isn't it up there? It's shut down, so we're just starting.
We're happy to plug you in and have you join the family. It is fun. We always like to see new faces. And then with that as well,
is I am gathering information on those who have been volunteers for a long time. I'm trying to piece together the history, but I also want to celebrate what everybody in North America has done. And a lot of people work behind the scenes.
Oh, I see it.
And things just get done, or outreach was done, and we never really celebrated it, and we never really wrote it down. So if you have that information, please come to me. If you have pictures, that would be great. And some of you I'll be calling, so don't be afraid, and I'll be picking your brain too. So you can see me tonight, or you can send that information.
What's that?
Programs at wildmushrooms.org.
Oh, there.
Programs at wildmushrooms.org. So is there anybody here who doesn't know our
Yeah.
speaker tonight?
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I thought I didn't need to.
Sorry about that.
I didn't need to do a good introduction. So with that, I definitely want to say we are so proud to have him as a member. This is someone who's given their time, their knowledge, and especially I think the sense of humor and sense of wonder and joy about learning about mushrooms and continuing to learn about mushrooms. Dr. Michael Beug has been he's professor emeritus still at Evergreen. Yep. He taught chemistry, mycology, and organic farming in Olympia for, let's just say, a good amount of time. And he still practices the farming up in his place. It's amazing. I don't know how one person can do all this work. And he's active in the North American Mycological Association, the Pacific Northwest Tea Council, and in addition to his new books, he co-authored Cascadia Fungi of North America in 2014. Does anybody have that book? Yeah, it's a great book if you're looking at something that's not Cascadia. It's all the cool things like the advanced fingers and all of that sort of stuff. He has multiple photographs that have appeared in numerous publications. He regularly writes about mushrooms for many articles, journals, the NAMA newsletter, Fungi magazine. In 2006, he received an award for contributions to amateur mycology. And also in 2017, Paul Stamets of Fungi Perfecti created the Mike Beug Scholarship in honor of him, who helped shape Stamets' career. And I think we can all say thank you for helping shape our love of the local fungi. So with this, Dr. Beug.
Yeah, we're gonna. I am unplugged. In fact, I better get plugged in. I was plugged in, I thought.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Did you want to sit?
I think I'm gonna try standing.
Okay, well, we can move you when you're ready.
Okay. Does this work? Yeah. Am I in the right position for this, for you to hear it? Okay. Okay, now I have to.
Also turn this on. There we go.
Are we on? Okay, here we go. Well, obviously you've had time to read the title, and I don't like to read my slides. But this is what the book looks like. And I had not the slightest intention of writing this book. I was writing an innocent little set of stories about mushroom hunting in the Columbia River Gorge during COVID. And Dr. Ammirati from the University of Washington called me up and said, I sure am glad you're writing a field guide to cover all these new mushrooms you've named and discovered. And I said, I didn't tell him, but the last thing we need is yet another field guide. What we really need is a key. And some of you are familiar with the Kits-Cates picture key, how to identify mushrooms to genus. This is, and I worked with Kit on developing that, and we tested it with my students at Evergreen over the years. So this is expanding that concept to pictures and taking it all the way to species, not to just genus. And so that's the design and the fundamental theory behind this book. And for those of you that had my first edition, you might want to know that this new edition has 90 new species. We're up to 1,092 images. The species coverage is 1,500 species now total. And I think of this book as a really good pair with Noah Siegel and Christian Schwartz's new book, with a title of that's almost identical, except that his says a comprehensive field guide instead of a key. But he came to me and I gave him permission to copy him because I like the idea of using these two together. And together, we actually have very little overlap between our two books. So the species coverage soars to over 2,000 species when you have both of the books. But the other thing about it that's distinctive is that my editor had never hunted mushrooms. And she took the first edition of the book. And by the way, I did not write to 10 Speed Press and ask them to publish the book. Paul Stamets told his editor about me. She emailed me the next day. I emailed her a PDF of the first edition, and I had a contract the following day. And I had been looking for a publisher for 2 years, and nobody would even answer my letters. And, they just went unanswered. So this book, I really owe a lot to Paul Stamets for, in many ways, because he taught me a lot about mushrooms while I was of the hallucinogenic kind, while I was teaching him about mushrooms of the other kind. And I wrote this book for me because I don't remember things very well anymore. I've hit 80 years old now, and but I'm still going strong. We took the Krista Cushman, who some of you know, and I took the Friends of the Gorge out on a foray yesterday. I'll be going out for 3 days with someone else. Julie Beeler is going to join me with the Evergreen State College class for 3 days at Trout Lake. And then there's the Stevenson foray, Friday, Saturday. And then the following Monday, a week from today, I will be back in town for a book signing at Annie Bloom's Books. So this is keeping me hopping. But that's not the main thing I'm doing lately, quite honestly. And I'm now on the Medicinal Mushroom Committee of the North American Mycological Association, and we're starting to write a medicinal culinary mushroom reporting form, and we're going to build a database to find out what's working for people and what isn't working. So, but back to my editor, she used my keys, and every place that she ran into trouble, I had to rewrite the key until it was clear to her. And then we also added a chapter in how to use a key for those people who've never done it. So that's the other major difference. And then probably the biggest difference of all is I added distribution information, which was not in the first edition. So this tells you where these mushrooms that are in this book are known now, but actually I'm finding things that aren't supposed to be here on an average of about 1 or 2 per outing. And so, but this is going to help us understand. So, but what I have told you in this book is what are the lookalikes you're going to find if you use this book in Europe? And what are the lookalikes are you going to find if you're going to use this book elsewhere in North America? And I think it'll work quite well, unless you get down into Georgia, North and South Carolina, into the Blue Mountains. And then they have such a different topography than we have. But you can use this pretty much all over the rest of the country, but it focuses on here. What I like to say is everything in the book is within 40 miles of where I live in the Columbia River Gorge. And pretty much, I think everything's roughly within 40 miles of you folks. You count the ocean and then going up towards Mount Hood and or Mount Adams. So the other neat thing is they assigned a fabulous designer. I designed the first book, but these background things are blow-ups of my photography. So everything in the book, the artwork and everything, is something that I created. So I have a chapter on how to hunt mushrooms safely, and I was glad to see that Gaia presentation. and to discover that I haven't logged into Gaia for a year and I didn't have my passport with me, so I just had to listen to the presentation. I couldn't follow it. But the center part of this book is very similar to what you had in the first edition. For those of you that have it, there's a 3-page key to the key. So your first choice is, does it have gills or not? And the way I structure a key is, that's about half of everything you're going to find. So the very first choice should split out half of the things. Some people write a key where the very first choice is, hey, there's this beautiful mushroom. Oh, there's this other beautiful mushroom. Oh, look at this beautiful mushroom. Well, you know, when you've got 1,500 species, it can take a bloody long time to get where you want to go. So this is a key to getting rapidly to the right part of the key. And then this is a sample of how I structured the pages. And the other advantage, and by the way, this book is bigger than the other book. So the pictures are bigger, the text is bigger, and all of the images are even clearer because it turns out the Chinese do a sharper job of printing than my first edition was in the US, second edition is in China. But one of the biggest mistakes people make, for example, in these 2 ascomycetes on the left is confusing the one on the bottom, which is edible, with the one on the top. It won't, well, the European version of that will kill you. This one will just put you in the hospital for a few months and you might need a liver transplant. So, but every picture is carefully selected and positioned to show you the critical difference. In this case, see, we've got a very convoluted center to it when you cut it in half. When you cut those in half, you've got basically a rounded, but a flattened rounded stipe, you know, but it's just sort of a standard stipe that's hollow. But there's quite a bit of difference. And so I figured this is really going to help people. Now, what really alarmed me, and this is important when you talk about, is this a good beginner's mushroom or not? I took some of the Gyrometra splenda in one hand, and I was holding a burn morel in the other hand, and I was hunting mushrooms on this lady's property with her. And she says, well, we don't eat mushrooms. And I says, well, look how easy it is to tell this cone-shaped morel from that brain-shaped thing there. She says, I can't see any difference. And then, that was 4 or 5 years ago, this spring, my neighbor had logged a whole bunch of his property and had his burn piles. Same thing, he and his wife, I did the same thing with them. I thought that was just one person who couldn't see. So, but mushrooms are really incredibly safe to learn to identify. You can handle any of them as much as you want. Well, don't overhandle an Amanita phalloides because you can actually rub the toxin in, but you got to work hard. You can taste any mushroom you want. I make that one exception for the red-pored Boletus bulcherimus. You'll survive tasting it, but it's not going to be a lot of fun. And but like yesterday with the Friends of the Gorge, this is something I always do, but then think maybe I shouldn't. I took a great big bite out of an Amanita. I'll call it Muscaria. It's actually Chrysoblema. It just doesn't taste very good. But the point is, you can nibble and spit any mushroom you want. You can handle any mushroom you want. You don't have to wear gloves. But you do need to be able to tell sometimes subtle differences, sometimes obvious differences. So again, these are some ascomycetes. So I put all of the similar ascomycetes together where you can compare them side by side rather than having a full. If you have these things in alphabetical order in a field guide, then things that look alike are very far apart, and it's much harder to get to the right answer. So that was the other idea that I had in constructing this book. And so here again is some polypores. All of the soft ones are together, the fleshy ones. And then now we'll get into actually slow down and talking about the mushrooms themselves. Chanterelles, of course, are the mushroom that I think there's probably about 5 million pounds fruiting this year in Washington State and another 5 million pounds fruiting in Oregon. And so it is of considerable use to be able to identify one from another. But they don't all taste quite the same. And of the big meaty chanterelles, there's actually 4. What I didn't show is Cantharellus subalbidus, the white chanterelle. But this one here is a very interesting mushroom. This is Cantharellus cascadensis, and it's genetically extremely close to the white chanterelle. And when it's still buried and not exposed at all, it looks exactly like a white chanterelle. It's white on top, white on the bottom. But as soon as the sun hits it and daylight hits it, it gets that beautiful yellow color on the top, and it's a striking yellow. It's much brighter yellow than Cantharellus formosus up in the upper left. But the ridges underneath, the hymenium, the fertile surface, stays white, just like a white chanterelle. And just like a white chanterelle, though, it bruises orange. And then the other one, though, that people were mistakenly identifying all summer long, down in the lower right, Cantharellus roseocanis, you find almost exclusively with spruce. And for some people, that's their favorite. My favorite of all the chanterelles is this one, the cascadensis. But the roseocanis is interesting. Rosy for reddish, canis means sort of it looks like it has a frosting on top. And it's something that rubs off. So that sort of rosy tan flush that you see on the upper left one in the lower right is going to disappear, and it'll look closer and closer to the formosus, but the pore surface is always going to be much brighter than a formosus. So you can separate these 3 from each other. And for me, the one on the lower right is by far my least favorite of them all. To me, at least, it has a somewhat bitter taste. But the whole point is I keep lookalikes together. And the other thing that I've done in this book, there's 200 name changes since the first edition. Sorry. These weren't mistakes well, a couple of them were mistakes I made in the first edition. I don't get things right all the time. But we've learned a lot about the DNA of these things just since 2021 when I wrote the first edition. And so this current book is up to date with the DNA as of the 1st of April, 2024. I was able to make changes. It went to the printer like the 2nd of April, but I put in one more brand new species, something I had been looking for years. There's a little gyrometer that's a little disc-shaped thing. It's only about yay big around, size of a silver dollar, but it's apricot colored and it's flat. And so I used to call it my little peach. And so I got it named just in time to go into this book, and it's Gyrometer persicula, which literally is Latin for little peach. So, but the point is, let me back up for a minute. I want to talk. The hydnums have been changing like mad, and where we thought we had one species when I was beginning, and it was called Hydnum repandum. And then we decided, no, it's not Hydnum repandum, so it's Hydnum neorepandum. But there was both a white and a yellow form. The white one actually is Hydnum olympicum. It's a completely different name. And there's one that looks much like this, but tends to be smaller. And I ate it for the first time yesterday. And it's Hydnum melitosarx. And it's about half the size of a typical Washingtonianum, but I found it rather bitter. and it came from up in the middle of the Indian Heaven wilderness. I did not pick it myself. I don't pick in wilderness areas, but somebody brought it to me, and they brought me a whole bag of them. So I made duxelles out of them, and the recipe for duxelles is in the book. That's what I do with almost all of my mushrooms when I have a whole bunch, and I don't have a lot of time to cook. I can cook a lot of mushrooms in a short time if I make duxelles. The extra ones get put in an ice tray, frozen, and then each cube, 1 to 2 cubes per person in a stew, an omelet, or you take a nice crostini and you spread it on crostini or the toast, and you put your favorite Tillamook cheese on top, and you melt the cheese into it. Now that's what I had for dinner last night. Oh boy! But tonight I ate a cold pizza in the parking lot. And then Hydnum Sarcodon stereosarcinon has now been changed to Hydnellum. Hydnellum used to be things that had sort of almost kind of like ragged pores on the underside, but it didn't have teeth. And now a lot of the tooth fungi that are not Hydnums and not good edibles, but are often good dye fungi, have been moved to Hydnellum. But I had this summer a whole lot of people identifying Hydnellum stereosarcinon as sweet tooth, which is the Hydnum washingtonianum. But there is a subtle difference you might notice. But the other thing to know about identifying mushrooms, when you want to identify mushrooms, you don't just look at them. You take a bite out of them, chew them, spit them out, smell them deeply, and you recognize also that when you get them home and they warm up, that smell will be more distinctive, be easier to spot, but you also tear the mushroom apart to see what the texture is like. And frequently, before I tear one apart, I cut it smoothly in half from top to bottom so I can look at the color of the flesh and the structure of the flesh inside. That'll often help me identify it. And the other thing I'm going to pay attention to is what are the trees in the area? And because the habitat, the taste, the texture, and the interesting thing about this Hydnum washingtonianum is closely related to a chanterelle. And does anyone know what a chanterelle feels like when you tear it apart? What's it like? It's like string cheese or chicken breast. So are these. Those are not. So by using a whole range of tools, you're going to have a much more powerful identification skill set. And that's the other thing that I think that the key helps you have, because it tells you the things that are important to look at. Because traditionally, when I've used mushroom books, I'll look at 2 descriptions side by side, and sometimes I can't figure out how you separate one from the other. Because somewhere buried in there is some difference that's important. But if you write a key, that's what you put in the key, is what to look for, where to focus for that kind of a mushroom. Okay, come on. Well, let me try something else here. What?
Right there.
Well, it's not working. It wasn't moving. I hit it again and again and again, and it wouldn't move. Now, but by moving it back one, then it would move forward, and that's what I was doing. But I hit it like 10 times, and it wouldn't change. And the other thing is, even when this book came out, you'll see a lot of things where the name is in single parentheses. That means that's the name we know it by, but it ain't right. It's going to get a new name. So that's my code name. Or if there's 5 or 10 or 15 species that all look identical, and you're going to need a microscope or something, I'll use the word group. So Sarcodon rimosus actually is going to be moved to Hydnellum. So the other thing I'll put down in the book is this is something that hasn't been done yet, but it needs to be done, and it will happen. So I tried to give people a direction on where things are going. Now, of the tooth fungi, I do have a real strong preference. The lion's mane and the bear's head. And people often call that mushroom on the upper right a lion's mane. Well, a bear's head has short hairs, and a lion's mane has these beautiful long hairs. And that's how you can get them right all the time. Pericium erinaceus grows on oaks and maples. It's not common. It grows on wounds, and it's just coming out. I went hunting for lion's mane 3 days ago, and I did find one. It's one that's going to be huge, but at this point I could wrap my hands around it like that. The teeth were so short that I couldn't even tell at first that it was going to be a lion's mane, except it was on a tree in a spot which produces a lion's mane every year. And the lion's mane actually start out reddish orange when they're really young. They're not white. And so here was this reddish orange ball that looked pimply. It didn't have these beautiful long teeth. And so the folks that were with me that I took over and showed it to them, I talked about how these teeth are about 4 weeks into the growth of the mushroom. At 2 weeks, they'd be half that length. And when it's just forming, they're not even going to look like teeth yet. The same is true of that Hydnum washingtonianum. Actually, the Hydnum malatiosarx that I ate last night, the teeth weren't yet visible, but it was just these little bumps on the underside because it was a very young specimen. And I have now concluded that my number one favorite edible mushroom of all, I used to say it was erinaceous, but bear's head beats it. It's even more delicious. And fortunately, Julie Beeler dropped off 3 of them for me a couple days ago, just little ones. Unfortunately, the next 3 days I'm going to be out with Evergreen students and I won't be home for dinner, so I can't cook them until this weekend. But it's something to look forward to. But years ago, up above Cispus, I had 20 students and we were doing a survey for the Forest Service, and high up in this fir tree, probably about 35 feet up, there was a bear's head like that. And so 3 students stood on 1, 2, 3, hugging the tree, and the one on the top got a stick, knocked that thing down. It took them 3 days to eat that one bear's head. So they can be very rewarding. You only really need to find one sometimes. The other thing is, these things are really important medicinal mushrooms. But that'll be a talk for later that I hope I get to tell you about the medicinal story. Now, you can occasionally find 2 or 3 of these things and maybe a few more in a day. The center picture I didn't take, that's from the East Coast. But a few years ago, I was up at Girdwood, Alaska. There'd been a 3-day mushroom foray. We hadn't found a single king bolete. And the park botanist who'd brought me up there, everyone went home at noon on Sunday. And she said, I know of this little island out in the bay. We can go watch the beluga whales, and we're going to wait out to the island on the logs and hope we don't fall in. We went out to that island. We got about that many boletes, the center picture. We each were carrying 2 of the big baskets, like that. We filled them. We picked every bolete on the island. The island was small, so we got them all. And the foray had only been 2 miles away, and we hadn't found a single king. So, but the next day, we had to take one of the speakers down to the Kenai Peninsula. So as we were driving down the Kenai River, I said, well, let's check up this logging road. So we would drive up the logging road until we saw king boletes growing along the side of the road and pick those. We'd get a dozen or 2 dozen. And we'd go into the woods and there wouldn't be any. We'd drive a little farther and we'd find some more. Well, there were 3 of us in her Ford Ranger. There wasn't room for anything else in there by the time we went home. And we were up all night. So the next day, I'm scheduled to take a ferry down to Cordova, but the ramp is not working to get on the ferry. So I had a choice between flying or driving up almost to Mount McKinley, across to the Copper River, and then following the pipeline down to Prudhoe, and then taking the ferry, which is what we did. But we had to drive right past that island to get there. So we had been there on a Sunday and picked everything and said, well, maybe there'll be a few more on Tuesday. We filled 4 baskets in an hour. So then we picked up her parents in Anchorage because they were visiting from Montana, and then we made our drive. And we spent the night at Copper Center, way up the Copper River, and then the next day we were able to make it to Cordova. And we gave half of our mushrooms away to the folks at Copper Center. I was staying with my kid's former babysitter, who by then was in charge of the indigenous harvest for the largest national park in the United States, and it is Native American Day today, and I want to honor that and note that. And then my friend, the botanist, was a friend with the head ranger of the park, and so she stayed there. And we gave the other half of the kings away down in Cordova, where we didn't find another king. But meanwhile, we told her husband, okay, we were there Tuesday, says, go back Thursday and Saturday. And he did. And he scored big every time. And so a year later, they're talking about this adventure to their friends. And their friend says, we went Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. The lesson here, I know it's long-winded, is kings can come up overnight. So when they're fruiting and you find a good patch, it pays to go every bleeping day. And there's a whole bunch of inland, this is the only bolete you're going to find, Boletus edulis, variety edulis. You'll also find this on the coast, and there's another variety edulis in the lower right. And variety grand, and they're primarily associated with the spruce trees. But the grand edulis is on the coast, and it's primarily associated with the hardwood trees along the coast. And you've got both. So when you're on the Oregon coast, you've got edulis and grand edulis both. And some people say, well, edulis has got to have a swollen stipe. No, it can be fairly equal, not swollen at all. But the stipe is always netted, like a fishnet pattern. And when it's young, it's tight and white frosted, like this one here that I show. And here you can clearly show the netting. And so, but that's the other important thing. When you find mushrooms, if you use social media to help get identifications, if you know the features to show and you post them and you don't know what your mushroom is, you're going to get better answers. Now, these are also in the Boletus edulis group. So the queen bolete, Boletus virginius, will be starting to fruit any day now. It's a lower elevation, later mushroom. The kings are coming to the end. But I have found ripe Boletus edulis, variety edulis, near Crown Point, when all the waterfalls in the gorge were frozen solid, all of the king boletes, I thought, would be frozen solid. But there were great big massive buttons like this, but of king boletes, not of the queen boletes. They were warm. It had been so cold so long that everything was frozen except for the actively growing mushrooms. They generate a lot of heat. And the spring kings, Boletus rex varus, I probably eat more of those than any other bolete because most people don't realize how many of them there are out there. So don't tell anyone. And don't watch my videos because I think I forgot to delete where I was hunting when I made the videos and posted them. But that's the way it goes. Fibrillosus is not quite as tasty. The queen tastes very much like the king to me. So I don't care whether I've got a king or a queen down the hatch. They are, believe it or not, way better as a medicinal mushroom than any old bloody reishi. So why are you going to stick with some woody, hard polypore when you can have a delicious meal and have better health from it? Now, the admirable bolete, Oreoboletus mirabilis, this may get a new name sometime today because genetically it's not related to anything else that's already called Oreoboletus. But the thing about this one is it grows on rotting hemlock. And I had always kind of ignored it until a couple of years ago. It has a lovely, a lemony flavor, a mild lemon flavor, as does Pulcheroboletus, currently Boletus smithii. And the thing about Boletus smithii, it's very variable in color. And Alex Smith, and many of you knew his daughter, who's no longer with us, but she was our morel expert from Corvallis. And this was supposed, Alex told me this was named for him because he's so changeable and the color of this one is so changeable. So that's how you can remember a smithii. It bruises blue, and I used to not eat any bolete that bruises blue, but I'm making an exception because this tastes very much like the admirable bolete, well worth eating. Another mushroom that bruises blue that I'd always ignored is the butter bolete. Butyriboletus, this is Quercy regius, the one that grows associated with oaks. And this one here was just below my Nebbiolo grapes, and it was the diameter of a dinner plate. And so the one on the side is the same mushroom just tipped over. So it's a blue bruising bolete, and very similar boletes that bruise blue are bitter. So how do you tell a bitter bolete from a butter bolete? You taste it, but sometimes the bitter bolete tastes sweet until you cook it. How do I know that? I did it. So that forced me to think harder about how you separate the two. I've made that mistake 3 times before I learned, not the first time. The flesh of a butter bolete is butter yellow. The flesh of a bitter bolete is white or maybe faintly yellowish, but it's not that nice butter yellow. Butter boletes are even better than king boletes. They're similar flavor, but they're crisper. They're just a wonderful texture. And so this is well worth learning. It took me a long time to learn it. I've been at this mushroom hunting since 1968, and I didn't figure these out until 3 years ago. So, but you can get a head start now. This one I didn't figure out until last year. This is the butter bolete that's associated with firs rather than the one associated with oaks. And it's a little bit paler, and so it's a little bit easier to mistake it for the bitter bolete. but boy, is it a delicious mushroom. And up around Mount Hood last year, people in the know, and I don't hunt around Mount Hood, were gathering this thing by the bucket loads. It's very, very abundant. It just barely, it's more common in the Sierras, and it just barely reaches into Washington. But it's still in pretty good numbers anywhere south of Mount Hood, and especially on the east slope. You want to get over the ridge and be down where it's starting to get drier, but you're still in the fir zone. And this thing has a slight pinkish cast that very quickly fades, but that helps you identify it. The pink is in the cap. And an extremely delicious bolete. And I can't believe for the last 40 years, I thought this was a bitter bolete. And man, is it good. So this is the oak-associated bitter bolete, and this is the fir-associated. There's two different fir-associated bitter boletes. But again, all of these things are right together in this book, so you can compare and contrast quite easily. Now, I said there was one mushroom that I don't like to taste, and that's the one in the upper left. And that photograph was the only time I have ever seen this mushroom until last weekend. That photograph came from Mount Rainier, and we found it near Goose Lake, this Rubroboletus pulcherimus, which is associated with conifers. And then Rubroboletus eastwoodii, the Satan's bolete, is associated with oaks and hardwoods. And this particular photograph is adjacent to my driveway at my house. And I don't have any reports on how poisonous this mushroom is because it sort of smells like an old outhouse. And that, I think, keeps a lot of people safe. And then this summer, I saw for the first time this Rubroboletus hematinus. I had no idea what it was, but Noah spotted it right away once I posted it on Facebook. The sponge starts out yellow and then turns solid red. And that's the distinction from the other two Rubroboletus. And we don't have good data on its edibility either. And of course, everyone's going bananas over eating turkey tail, Strometes versicolor, the #1 medicinal mushroom. And it is actually #1 in my book, but not the mushroom you pick and find. I've got them all over my orchard. I never would even pick one. The thing to think about if you're thinking about medicinal mushrooms is the way that they discovered the drug penicillin, which comes from the ascomycete Penicillin notatum. That same mushroom, Penicillin notatum, is what forms blue cheese. Now, blue cheese has almost no penicillin in it. In fact, almost all collections of Penicillin notatum have almost no penicillin. And early in World War II, there was a nationwide search where people sent in samples from all over the United States and Canada, and someone from the upper Midwest, a housewife, I think it was a moldy piece of bread that had far more penicillin than any moldy orange or anybody else's moldy piece of bread. So all of our penicillin comes from that one piece of bread, which is cultivated, grown, and isolated for the penicillin. As far as I'm concerned, the same is true of turkey tail. I get my turkey tail from Paul Stamets' company because they have tested thousands of different turkey tail collections, found the most potent ones, then grown the mycelium. And I'm interested in that because think about what the mycelium in this structure. It's paper thin, It's in the soil. It's exposed to all these soil parasites, bacteria, viruses, other fungi that are going to try and eat it, other trees that are going to try and parasitize it. So that mycelium has to produce a tremendous amount of defensive chemicals. But the other interesting thing is you grow it on rice. Now, rice hulls that you use are worthless as far as medicine. They have no anti-cancer activity until you grow the turkey tails on them. And then the rice hulls themselves become potent. Now, the Chinese separate the two different products and sell them separately, but they use both. In this country, most people say, no, you have to have the mushrooms, and that the rice hulls are just filler. They're not just filler, they're critical. But I wanted to show you in this picture how variable turkey tails can look in the field and be. I was positive that one in the upper left, those great big thick things that you couldn't bend, couldn't possibly be turkey tails till I got the DNA results back. But what is always true is that on the underside, there's fine white pores. There's not little teeth. It's not smooth. There's pores. And it's not purple. It's always those white little pores. But the cap can be incredibly varied, but it's always banded. It's never totally unique. But I thought it also had to be thin and flexible. No, not that, but everything else holds true. And again, I've been mushrooming since 1960. I didn't figure out that upper left thing was a turkey tail until after this book was published. So it's not in there. So this is what everyone calls reishi and goes after. Actually, when you get it young and slice it and cook it, I've been told it's quite tasty. But I don't know what reishi is. There's lots of different fungi that are called reishi. I'd like to know a lot more about it, and I'd much rather eat a king bolete. Now, thank you, Don Moore, for a trip, and Kim, and some of you that are in this picture. We did a little 8 OMS members. I was the guest, the 8th person, and we went after truffles. And this may be the single most memorable day of my life. It is that day we went down by Eugene and went out, and these were our 2 truffle finder dogs. So this is a full day's work, and I think the total cost for that for us was about $1,200. I don't remember. That sounds like a lot of money just for that little piddly little bunch of truffles. So what this dear lady told me here with her dog, she said, okay, put him in a dry paper towel, put him in a gallon jug, and put any food in it that has a high oil content. Don't put something like rice or oats, that they won't do anything. Those eggs are uncooked. I tried it with cooked eggs, that doesn't work. But raw eggs, cheese, Asiago cheese was my favorite. Butter, I did avocados. So this is half of each person got 2 ounces. So this is 1 ounce. So I had 2 jars. And in the other jar, I had whole ripe avocados. And so after 2 days in the refrigerator, I took all that food out, put the truffles in a new paper towel, put it in the refrigerator 2 more days. That was 2 more gallons of food. And then I did that a 3rd time. So I got 6 gallons of food out of my 2 ounces of truffles. And I still had all the truffles. And my wife and I didn't finish eating the truffled cheeses, the truffled butters. I mean, we went through the eggs pretty fast and the avocados pretty fast. But it was 2 years of eating out of that. So if you get a chance to go truffling, do it. And you're where it's really good. Or if you know, but you have to have a dog. Because if the truffles aren't ripe, they don't have any taste. It's only a ripe truffle. It's all in the smell. If it doesn't smell, it's worthless. And then there's the puffballs. A puffball, you cut it open from top to bottom, through the middle. If it's uniform pure white inside and soft like a marshmallow, it has to be both. It's got to look like a marshmallow and feel like a marshmallow, except it won't be sticky. And they can be quite good to eat. Now the big ones, like the Calvo Vista subsculpta shown here, you can slice it about the thickness of a slice of sliced bread. And then, depending on your preferences, either dip it in a tempura batter and cook it that way, or you dip it in your favorite French toast batter and you have it for breakfast with maple syrup. And so that's a really good use for the puffballs. Now the upper one in the, let's see, that would be your right. I'm dyslexic, so I struggle. That's an interesting one in that the gleba, that stuff in the center, as it matures, turns a beautiful violet. In most puffballs, it turns kind of olive brown. But down in the lower right is a scleroderma. When they are young, they also are pure white, but they're not soft like a marshmallow. And many years ago, one of my students forgot about the soft like a marshmallow part. So I can now tell you what happens if you eat half of one. She was careful and didn't eat very much. Well, she didn't make it to the porcelain throne within minutes. And she was using all portals to get rid of the material. And then I was giving a talk in Stevenson a couple years ago, and the lady there said she was in her 60s or 70s. She actually wound up in the hospital for a month after biting into a scleroderma. So make sure it looks like a marshmallow and feels like a marshmallow, and don't eat a scleroderma. Sclerodermas will kill a dog, they'll kill a pig, but they make people so sick so fast that you're over it fast. That's the one good thing about it, I guess. And then, oh my gosh, big bowl of fettuccine noodles there, that's spiraceus. When you find that, usually I try and take the whole mushroom, the root and all. But when you see one of these, cut it off at ground level, because quite often if you leave that root, you leave the stem, it'll fruit again year after year. Just keep track of where you found this. And you can literally cook it like it was noodles, and you can make lasagna with it and things like that. And then there's these little club things, Aloe clavaria, not of any interest as an edible, but when you see an area the size of this entire room that's paved solid with Aloe clavaria, it's a really beautiful thing to see. So a lot of my love of mushrooms is just looking at them and finding them in the woods. And I have a very thorough cover of Ramarias and other coral fungi, because my mentor was Kit Skates, the one who developed the picture key that some of you know, and she was the Ramaria specialist. So when she passed, I took over the study of Ramaria. They are bloody hard to identify. But what I can tell you, and the instructions are in the book, as soon as you see a Ramaria, you don't take it home, you make the color notes right away. Cut the Ramaria through the middle from top to bottom. Note the color of the inside of the top of the branches, the lower branches, and the stem. Look to see whether there's something that looks like a rusty root at the very base of the stem. And then, does the stem is it cartilaginous, like rubbery, like a piece of cartilage? Is it fibrous? Does it break sort of like your average mushroom, your average trichoma, something like that? What's that texture like? The other thing about the Ramarias, none of them are poisonous, but quite a few of them will give you a nice trip to the porcelain throne again. But the only ones I mess with that are worth eating, to me, are something like Ramaria rubri permanens. And there's one that's shaped just like that. It's called Ramaria rubri evanescens, because it very quickly turns to pure white. But look at the size of that meaty base. That mushroom in the Ramaria rubri permanens probably weighed 2 pounds. And you want to get if you're thinking about eating a Ramaria, you want the branches to be stubby. These other things, you're going to spend a lot of time getting them clean and prepping them, and they're not that good to eat, and they're so beautiful. Leave those others behind. But if you want to identify them, this key is a good way to do it. And I've added a whole bunch of Ramarias in this second edition because I had somebody who was willing to do the DNA for me, because a lot of them you can't be sure of the ID until you get the DNA done. And now we'll move on to the other half of the book, the back half, the guild mushrooms. How are we doing for time? What? Oh, okay. I'm okay. Then look at this beautiful puffball here. Yeah, it looks like that when you cut it in half. Not quite like a puffball anymore. I have seen what was called at the time Amanita muscaria buttons for sale in the Olympia Farmers Market as puffballs. But if you just cut it in half, I mean, it was so young that you couldn't see the color of the cap. But as soon as you cut it in half, you could see that there was a cap, and you could see the color in the stem. And so always, you want to cut these things from top to bottom. And this mushroom accounts for about 90% of all mushroom deaths worldwide. And the reason for this is that it has been spread worldwide. It's a European mushroom, not native to North America or Canada or Australia or India or China or Russia, but it's now everywhere. And it's delicious. Absolutely the best meal you've ever had. And the last one, but so learn Amanita phalloides. So what I used as the example for how to use a key, I have a picture of a mushroom, of a phalloides that's not the same as the picture in the book, and you're asked to identify it. And then I have a different mushroom, a picture. Again, I use a picture that's not in the book, but you're asked to identify it using the key. So, but really get to know this mushroom well, because where I live, I'm technically in white salmon. We don't have it. We'll never see it. Where you live, it can be abundant. It's stretched all the way from California up to now Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's just come right up the freeway, right up the parkway, but it's also on the coast. So you really need to know Amanites. They have a white spore print. The gills are free from the stem, but barely free. They have a sac-like structure that covers the whole thing that when it's young, and it splits open with all of the sac typically staying at the base. But it's often underground. And so until you get experience, you want to take your knife and move around. Make sure you get the whole mushroom when you're picking, because I know people who have died thinking they got something else when they just cut the mushroom off at ground level and never saw that vulva. Specifically, what was called in my day Lepiota naucina, now Agaricus leucophytes, looks just like this, but it doesn't have the universal veil. And it's white. It looks like but there is a white form of Amanita phalloides, and there's a whole bunch of deadly white destroying angels. And this woman was a quote unquote expert. She didn't know squat about how to identify mushrooms. She'd been doing it for 20 years, but it's so safe, it's actually hard to get into trouble. But when she lopped off the Amanita, leaving the vulva in the ground, it killed her. Now, these are some of the other Amanitas we'll find out in about. Calyptoderma has a very similar cup-shaped vulva, but it tends to leave a thick skull cap. This is edible. I wouldn't eat it. But over by Willard in May this year, I was coming back from the lava fields and disappearing lake. There must have been 1,000 of these. I'd never seen anything like it. For about a block and a half along the side of the road, 50 feet into the woods. Just pile, and so this is just some of them. And I didn't move these all together. It was that thick for a full block. And a lot of people would grab these and eat them. The problem is, if you remember this color, that's not very different from an Amanita phalloides color. You've got to be awfully good if you're going to mess around eating an Amanita. I don't eat any of them. Now, some people, and I had somebody, I think he lived down by Eugene. He thought he had one of these grisettes, the ones that don't have a ring, they don't have a partial veil. What he had was an Amanita phalloides that the partial veil had rubbed off, and he had it for dinner. Now, he realized it almost immediately and called me up and got treatment quickly and didn't have any permanent damage. But you really have to pay attention. And I don't eat any Amanita. So this is some of the variable things that you'll see in that genus. And all of the mushrooms across the top are Amanita chrysoblema. That's the only species we have in the Pacific Northwest that looks like Amanita muscaria, which has white warts rather than these somewhat creamy colored warts. And we do have Amanita muscaria, variety muscaria, probably in Portland, in town, in Seattle, in town, where it's been brought over with trees from Europe, but it hasn't tended to spread. But if you're out in the woods, you're only going to find Amanita chrysoblema, which looks identical to another mushroom, Amanita muscaria, variety flavivulvata, which is found in California, but not up here yet. So, but the other thing you can do to be careful is just say Amanita muscaria group, because it has the same toxins. So just ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. But the ones your mother gives you won't do anything at all. And then, if they're brown capped, they're even more vigorously mind altering than the muscaria group. And one of the tales that I got from Dr. Stuntz in my early training, and maybe my second or third year, he told of a graduate student who decided to trip on this mushroom in the middle, the one with the toad. Now, Kit had to put the toad on that to take the picture. That was a Kit Skates picture. But he ate a couple of those, and he was tripping, and then he fell into a deep comatose sleep. He was in his car, And he was dreaming that somebody was trying to throw him off a cliff. And he was clawing to not go off over the edge. And he wakes up in the morning in his car, the steering wheel is broken, the headliner's torn out, the dash is destroyed. So I don't recommend this as a desirable, but this mushroom is legal. You can eat as much as you want because it makes you angry, it makes you warlike, where psilocybes make you peaceful and reflective, friendly towards others, and they were fighting the Vietnam War bloody hard. And so they were made illegal. And for about 20 years, I was the only one in this country, I think, allowed to do research on psilocybes from the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s. And I think because at the same day that Paul Stamets showed up wanting to study mushrooms, and Jeremy Bigwood, who studied the Muscaria things, and Jonathan Ott, I meant to say, Jeremy Bigwood shows up, and Paul and I have decided he was almost undoubtedly CIA. Because he was able to easily get me a Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4 drug license, a prescription pad to write for anything I wanted, pure psilocybin and pure psilocin. I was pretty young and kind of ignorant, and I didn't think anything of it. We just did our research. He stayed as a student of mine for 6 years and then vanished. Slowly after another student of mine, the Hollywood Bandit, who was the most successful bank robber in North American history, money-wise. He was also a student of my wife who was teaching consumer chemistry. And he was a very generous, wonderful soul that lived up in a tree house right on the edge of the Evergreen campus. And eventually stole my psilocybin and psilocin standards and eventually got shot to death in a failed bank robbery where he escaped to a trailer in the backyard of yet another friend of mine. I don't know. How do I live? I don't know. Anyway, Lepistanuta, always cook your mushrooms thoroughly. I don't care what it is. The mushrooms are the healthiest when they start to caramelize, when they brown. Not till they're cooked to a crisp, but just till they're nicely caramelized. Because then there's a protein that combines with a sugar, then it makes this incredibly flavored chemical that makes the mushroom far more delicious, and it also makes it far more medicinally valuable. Lepistanuta, if you eat it raw or only lightly grill it, you can expect bloody diarrhea and ruptured blood cells. So cook your mushrooms well. And all of these, you really need to know the Callibia ribulosa, which used to be Clitosabe ribulosa, which used to be Clitosabe d-beta. That's full of muscarine. Perspiration, salivation, lacrimation, vomiting, diarrhea. These smell like anise and you can cook with them. Matsutake grows with grows with Allotropa virgatum. This is the Oregon coast matsutake. And these are matsutake indicators. They're very firm. Russulas are interesting. What I'm going to say about Russula is the cap color is worthless for identification. The spore print color, the taste, and the bruising are the things you want to look at. White spores are usually hotter than blazes. And so, Russula aerugинea. Aerugинea is a green-capped russula. Which one of these is Russula aerugинea? Anyone want to guess? All of them. No, just the one in the upper right. Just that one. That's the only one. I did the DNA on all of them last summer. Yeah. But there's one rushlet. Rustlets I call jars, just another rushlet. There's one, when you scrape it, it quickly turns yellow and then slowly brown. Take those home. Those are the shrimp rustlets. There's about 5 species. Don't bother, and then don't bother with these bleeping lobsters. These have exactly the same flavor. And there's a lot more of them because everyone's after the lobster. But if you are picking the lobster, don't pick it when it's turning red or you've got another vomit comet. Leave that for the artists. And the milk mushrooms, I don't eat any of them, but they're fun. This is another thing. I took this picture. There was 5 feet of snow on the ground. It had been 14 degrees for 2 weeks. These mushrooms were warm. This is the winter oyster. Oyster mushrooms are easy, reliable to identify. Surprisingly, our most abundant one isn't named. It isn't what we thought it was. Cortinarius is one of my specialties. Use a UV light. This one over here is deadly poisonous. It grows in sphagnum bogs and it fluoresces blue. And it slowly shuts down your kidneys. These are some of the Cortinarius that I've been working on. I have 600 collections under oaks that I'm working on right now. Really beautiful things, and yet totally unnamed. But then those ones with the colorful gills, I don't know. And we have one more slide. Okay, have to back up forward. Okay, well, I guess we're going to call this the end because it won't go back, it won't go forward. Yeah. What? Okay. Ah, there. And then there's the prints can sometimes get rather significant size. It always smells like almonds, but make sure you stay away from the one that has a gray-brown cap versus sort of a ruddy brown cap. And Coprinus comatus, the shaggy mane, is delicious, but don't ever eat inky caps. The Coprinopsis atramenteria, there's 3 different species in the group. You can drink as much alcohol as you want up till the minute you eat that mushroom. And then for 2 weeks after, you better not drink any alcohol. Now that right now rules it out for me. But the other part is it's highly carcinogenic. So don't eat it. And that's it. Questions?
Can I just say something real quick before you guys leave? I have some flyers for the fall show on this table. Feel free to take a small stack and put them up in your local neighborhood. If you don't mind, please.